The Vorith Empire spanned 11 star systems. Its palace on the capital world of Velkareth was carved from living crystal, walls that breathed light, ceilings that shifted like slow auroras, corridors wide enough to march a battalion through without brushing shoulders. It had stood for 400 years without a single crack. It had never, in those 4 centuries, gone completely silent. Until today, Lucas Mercer was not supposed to be here. He was a mechanic, 28 years old, from Columbus, Ohio, with grease permanently under his fingernails and a patch on his jacket that read Terran Expeditionary Support Corps. He had been assigned to repair the water recycling unit aboard the diplomatic shuttle Marigold. He was not a soldier. He was not a diplomat. He was not a hero. He was just the guy who had been in the wrong corridor when the hull breach happened. The explosion had scattered the diplomatic team across 2 decks. When the smoke cleared, Lucas had found himself standing over the crumpled body of Ambassador Delacroix, who was unconscious but breathing. Beside him, barely the height of his knee, was a small figure wrapped in iridescent robes the color of a dragonfly's wing. She had enormous violet eyes. 3 delicate silver tendrils curled from her temples like question marks. She was maybe 6 years old, if Vorith years meant anything close to human ones. She was also shaking. "Hey," Lucas had said. Hey, it's okay." He didn't know if she understood Standard. He didn't care. He crouched down until he was eye level with her, held out both hands palms up, an open gesture, the universal "I have no weapons," and made his voice as steady as he could. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Lucas. What's yours?" She stared at him. Then, very quietly, she said, "Arya." He smiled. "Okay, Arya. Can you walk?" She nodded. "Good. Then let's get somewhere safe." What followed were 17 hours that Lucas would spend the rest of his life struggling to explain to people. He had no weapon beyond a utility multi-tool. He had no map of the ship's interior. He had no backup, no comm signal, and no idea that the tiny girl whose hand he was holding was Princess Arya Velketh, third heir to the Vorith throne and the most politically significant child in 11 star systems. He only knew that she was scared, that someone was hunting them, and that he was the only person standing between her and whatever came through the next door. So he did what humans do. He improvised. He rigged a pressure sensor to a cooling pipe and turned a maintenance corridor into an alarm system. He used thermal paste and a reflective emergency blanket to mask their heat signatures from the hunter's scanners. He fed the princess nutrition gel from his repair kit and let her sleep in a storage alcove while he kept watch, running calculations in his head. Not military calculations, but mechanic ones. Air supply, power reserves. How long before someone noticed the silence? When 3 Vorith soldiers finally found them. Not enemies, real soldiers, loyal to the crown. Lucas had already barricaded the room with a cleverly wedged hydraulic arm and nearly taken off his own fingers setting up a tripwire alert. The lead soldier had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had looked at the princess. Arya had her arms wrapped around Lucas's leg. The palace receiving hall could hold 3,000 people. Today it held the empress herself, Vorith High Commander Velketh Saraya, the woman whose portrait hung in every diplomatic station in known space. She was 7 feet tall, her crest fanned wide in formal display, her eyes the same violet as her daughter's, but harder, older, carrying the weight of 4 centuries of empire behind them. The human delegation stood on one side of the room. A dozen people, all of them cleaned up, their formal jackets pressed. Ambassador Delacroix had recovered and stood at the front, trying very hard not to show how nervous he was. Lucas stood at the back. He had showered. He had borrowed a jacket that was slightly too small in the shoulders. He was acutely aware that everyone in this room was more important than him. The empress descended the crystalline steps toward the delegation, each footfall precise and measured. The ceremony of formal address was ancient and exact. Delacroix opened his mouth to begin the greeting. Then it happened. Arya had been standing beside her mother, a tiny figure in formal silver robes, her tendrils arranged with jeweled clips. She had been perfectly still, perfectly composed, every inch the imperial princess she had been trained to be. And then she saw him. Her violet eyes went wide. Her composure, built by years of court training, crumbled in an instant, the way only a child's can, all at once and completely. "Mom." The word was barely above a whisper. But the palace acoustics were perfect. They carried it everywhere. Mom, that's him. The empress stopped. 3,000 attendants, guards, diplomats, and staff stopped breathing. Arya pointed directly at Lucas Mercer, who was trying very hard to become part of the wall behind him. That's the human who stayed awake all night, so I wouldn't be scared. The silence that followed was not the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of an entire civilization recalibrating. The empress turned. Slowly. She looked at the human delegation, past Delacroix, past the ministers and advisors and formally credentialed officials, until her gaze settled on a mechanic from Columbus, Ohio, who was currently turning a remarkable shade of red. Lucas, for his part, looked at the floor, then at the ceiling. Then, finding neither of those adequate, back at the floor. You, the empress said. Her voice was like a chord played on an instrument too large to see. You are the one they call the keeper. Lucas blinked. I what? No, I'm a mechanic. Our soldiers' reports describe a human who built a sensor array from cooling pipe and heat paste, who calculated air reserves and rationed a single nutrition pack across 17 hours, who slept in shifts and stayed awake through the final watch. The empress took one step toward him, who, when asked by my daughter if he was frightened, said, a little. But that's okay. Fear just means you know something important is happening. The silence stretched. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. I mean, that's just true. Arya broke from her mother's side. She crossed the marble floor in quick, precise steps and stood in front of Lucas, craning her neck up at him with an expression of absolute certainty. I told the guards, she announced, that you were the bravest person on the ship. I really wasn't. You didn't have a weapon. No. You didn't have a map. No. You didn't even know who I was. Lucas looked at her. You were a scared kid. Didn't need to know anything else. The silence changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of 4 centuries of empire, of war and treaty and diplomatic calculation, of a civilization that had spent 400 years deciding what it valued and how it measured worth. The Empress of the Vorith looked at the mechanic from Columbus, Ohio, for a long moment. Then she did something that no human had ever seen her do. She bowed, not the shallow diplomatic incline, not the measured courtesy bow of equal to equal. She lowered her head to a human being, full and unhurried, the way one bows to something greater than rank. On behalf of the Vorith Empire, she said, we owe you a debt that cannot be calculated. Lucas opened his mouth, closed it. He said, fixed her recycling unit. The first one. I mean, before everything. 3,000 people exhaled. And then, because it started with Arya, a 6-year-old princess who didn't know she wasn't supposed to, the palace laughed. They gave him a medal. He put it in his toolbox, between the worn-down socket wrench and the spare gasket tape. Some things, he figured, just belonged together.